Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Capstone's booth. Make sure I'm not, I think, either behind or let's see which is the way. That should be okay. So this is Capstone Precision Group. We'd like to welcome you guys today. We're going to talk a little bit with Bryan Litz over here, myself, Emil Praslick. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of improving your hit percentage, kind of what you need to do to hit targets downrange. First, brief overview. Capstone Precision Group, we represent all the brands you see up here. So this is Lapua. We get the cartridges, cartridge cases, projectiles, and rimfire from Lapua. We import these to the United States, and we are the sole distributor for all those products. Same thing with Vitavori powder, made in Finland. We import that. We're the sole distributor in the United States for Vitavori. Berger bullets and Berger ammunition is made down in Mesa, Arizona. And we, of course, distribute that. So we kind of cover all the brands that you see on the shirt here. So that kind of overview. Please, check out our booth, look at our catalogs, you'll see all the different products. We've got new products in all the different product lines. So please check that out. So, Bryan, make us smarter.
All right. So. On the bullet side, Emil gave an overview. We represent all these brands. What I do mostly in particular is focus on bullet design and testing. And in bullet design, there are a lot of factors that go into it. Obviously, we're trying to optimize performance, right? But in order to do that, you have to really understand the application. Okay, optimize for what? Optimize for hit percentage at long range, optimize for small groups at short range. So it really requires a holistic understanding of the objectives and the constraints, right? So does the bullet need to be magazine fed? Does it need to stabilize in a conventional twist rate? All of these questions have to be answered to kind of scope a new bullet design before we even start designing or test firing anything. We need to kind of know what bounds we can't go outside of. Then once we have an understanding of the constraints, then it becomes the design in some ways kind of makes itself. You want the longest nose that you can fit within the constraints because a long nose reduces drag, right? And depending on the shape of it, can do a better or worse job at that. Trading off between like a VLD versus a tangent ogive, that's where we arrived at a hybrid ogive. Hybrid ogive is a combination of both of those. It takes kind of the best of each without the downside. So we weigh all of these requirements and constraints and then come up with the best shape that maximizes performance within that application. Now, once we have a design on paper, goes into prototyping, we start getting some samples that we can test. And whenever we test, we do a lot of the same stuff that end users end up doing, like test it for sensitivity to seating depth, for example. One of the tests that we do on the hybrids to verify that they are length tolerant is we'll shoot groups at 15 off, 30 off, 45, and 60, so every 15 thousandths. And what we're looking for is basically the same group sizes at all of those jump lengths. And so once that's achieved, we can move on to some like longer range flight performance testing, which we do with Doppler radar. The guy who makes the Doppler radar that we use is standing back there as it happens. So if you have detailed questions about how the flux capacitor works inside, that's your guy. I know how to use it. And so what we use it for in the design process is first to see if there are any problems. Like one of the issues when you start expanding designs and trying to optimize things, it can be easy to overshoot a good design by making a bullet too long, for example. When a bullet's too long, it becomes very sensitive to stability conditions, right? You don't have such a wide range of stability that it will work in. And so we can test that out on Doppler radar, see how it looks, see what the stability is at transonic, see what the shot-to-shot BC variation is. So we use it in the loop of design as a tool to see, like, did we reach too far with this design or is it good? Can we reach further with this design? So it's kind of our litmus for all things design. And then we use that also turning the corner out into application. We bring that Doppler radar to a lot of different shooting events throughout the year. PRS, ELR, even rimfire events we'll take the radar to and measure the performance of competitor systems with the equipment that they brought. All right, and what that allows us to do is build a database of Doppler radar measured drag models for all the bullets that everybody's shooting. and it's kind of biased toward the bullets that are shot the most. So the bullets that are shot the most, we have literally hundreds of test cases that are averaged together from all different barrels, all different locations, all different combinations of ways that those bullets are sent downrange. So we can characterize that in a model in a ballistic solver so that your trajectory predictions at range are as accurate as they can be. So that's kind of the arc from conception through to application of how bullet designs are kind of thought of, you know, and are going from marketing, which determines like, hey, we really have a need for a bullet like this. All right, understanding the constraints, understanding what we can do to optimize it, testing it with radar, and then going to the field to apply and see how it's working for everybody and if we need any adjustments to it. So that's kind of the process. It's a really good combination of understanding user requirements and understanding our design process and the cause-effect relationship between the things that we do in production and the things that are going downrange at the end of the day. So that's kind of the quick back to front holistic picture. I like to leave a lot of time for question and answer, so we can probably wait till the end though. We'll have Emil talk to us about the other side. So the way that I kind of like to think of it is there are things in shooting that are deterministic, right? Those are the things we can measure and apply a solution for. Like your elevation when you're shooting long range is relatively deterministic compared to the wind, for example. So to be a well-rounded long-range shooter, you need to have an understanding and mastery of those deterministic variables, but also the things that we haven't yet been able to measure and make deterministic. That's where the experience of wind reading, the rules of all that come in. So I won't go any further into his territory than that.
Thanks, Bryan. You know, everything that we do in shooting is trying to increase our hit percentage, right? So, and there's lots of ways to do that. You have to do some mechanical things. You have to do your research. You have to do your whole design process about getting the right projectile and the right type of platform. You know, and whenever I talk to people about, quote, reading the wind or negotiating the wind or whatever you want to call it, first thing I usually say is, you know, you've got a couple of factors you need to be doing to hit a target. You have to have stability of your platform. You have to have good data. You have to have a good zero, a good known starting point, right? So what, you know, some competitive shooters call a no-win zero or a win zero. And like, for example, you know, if you don't have a lot of time shooting and you go to a range and they've got targets all the way set out to like 1,200 meters or something, most guys will go, let's start shooting at the far targets. Because it's a natural thing, but you almost can't spend enough time at 100 yards or 100 meters. You can spend all day there, or 2 days, or even a week to make sure everything is exactly right before you go out the distance. You have to have that baseline. And it also, marksmanship matters. You can have the best platform, best ammunition, everything, custom drag model, you own, you know, a Doppler radar yourself, and you're out there, you got a Snickers bar in your pocket and it gets melted every day because you go stand in front of a Doppler radar shooting shots downrange. But none of that matters if you suck. Okay? So when you pull the trigger and if that crosshair or sights isn't where you think it is, nothing matters. So take some time to work on marksmanship every time you go out and shoot, whatever your application is. If you're shooting off a bench, if you're shooting in the prone with a bipod, if you're practicing for hunting and using shooting sticks, whatever, work on getting your movement small, moving that trigger in a smooth manner, all the basic tenets of marksmanship. It's important. So I'll get off my soapbox for that. That's an old retired Army guy coach talking to you. So just, if you suck, it doesn't help. Moving that aside, I mean, so when we talk about the wind, you know, so Bryan said deterministic, you know, so I learn words all the time hanging around Bryan. So wind is a non-deterministic variable, which means it cannot be expected to occur with certitude, which means that you don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment. So unlike a lot of aspects of ballistics, it really is an analog process. It's a continuous feedback loop. What you're seeing, what you're figuring out where you want to do, maybe where the impact is, where the impact of other people's shots are. These are all like feedback inputs that you need to be constantly aware of. So, like, the most base, first it starts out with a mindset. When you go out to shoot in the wind, before talk about any of the technical aspects of how to measure speed or direction and come up with calculations and how to manipulate your solver and all that other stuff, it starts off with a mindset. You have to stay in control of your shooting situation. I mean, those people that have shot competition stuff, your mental mindset of being, you're the one controlling the thing. Like, don't let the rifle control you. Don't let the pistol control you. You're controlling the pistol or the rifle or your sights. The day is not happening to you. You are happening to the day. The wind is not happening to you. The wind is not, you know, an evil NPC in a computer game that shows up every time you're about to, like, level up, right? So I want to be good right freaking now. So first thing I look at is, like, probably the easiest thing to determine or feel physically is just the wind speed. So, hey man, and you can not only, you have your senses to do that, we have weather reports, we have all kinds of tools, we have Kestrels. You know, if you're serious about long range shooting, I don't work for Kestrel, but if you're serious about long range shooting, you should have some sort of a solver that has a weather meter, ability to measure the wind, where you're at. It's a good baseline, you know, and if you have one with applied ballistic software in it, you're getting both of that. You're both getting a weather solution, all the other elements of it, plus a ballistic solving solution right there in your hand. So wind speed, that's one of the components. And in terms of, like, just your journey through life as a long range shooter, you should learn how to judge wind speed without any kind of device. Right? If you look at any kind of old marksmanship manual, you know, from like 1952, and you look at that thing, there's going to be some chart in there that says, hey, at 3 miles an hour, smoke goes up. At 5 miles an hour, you feel the wind. And at 10 miles an hour, a leaf does whatever. There's a whole list of stuff. And, you know, these lists are great, but they're only good in the area where stuff looks like that, right? So if I lived in, like, West Texas or up on the plains of Saskatchewan, and the only thing that's out there growing that's like more than 3 feet high has been blown over, you know, during the ice age, but you have to learn what that environment looks like in stuff like in wind speed. Like, when I go to the grocery store, I come out, I'm looking at the tops of trees, I see, like, the mirage coming off the top of a car, and I'm trying to, like, determine wind direction and speed. I'm, like, always working on it. I'm driving down the highway, looking at the grass blowing. I'm trying to put a number on it all the time, And you can get pretty bloody good at it, really good at it. Yeah, I mean, the beard, like, one time I was on a runway, and the wind was, like, blowing and gusting, and so I put my feet kind of flat on the runway. I held the Kestrel up here, and I closed my eyes. And every once in a while, a gust would push me onto, like, my heels. And so every time he did that, I looked at the Kestrel, and it was like 14.5 miles an hour. I'm like, okay, so now I know that when my fat butt gets pushed back on my heels, that's 14.5 miles an hour. I was shooting an ELR match down in Texas, and Chase Stroud, who's a really good ELR shooter, like, there's this huge gust comes by, and this the sand picks up. And he's like, that's 21 miles an hour. I'm like, the hell it is. He goes, trust me. He had been watching sand, whatever, but he had been watching sand for like a month. And he knew that that type of sand, when it got lifted off the ground, was a minimum 21 miles an hour. I'm like, so I took my Kestrel, I went out and stood there, and when the sand got picked up, I looked at the Kestrel, and sure as hell, it was 21 miles an hour. So those are physical skills, man, that will make you a better shooter. You should do as much of that as possible. When I was in the Army, it was great because I had privates running around. So I used to, like, give a private a radio and a Kestrel, and I have them go down range and have them stand next to a bush or tree or something with a bunch of veg on it. And I look at them with binos, and I try to put a number on whatever I saw the stuff around him blowing. I'm like, hey man, what's the wind blowing? He's like, because I think to myself, that looks like 9 miles an hour. He's like, it's 8.2, Sergeant. I'm like, oh, that's not 9, it's 8. Why is it that? So those types of skills are really important to build, because when you're doing long range shooting, trying to find the effect of the wind downrange, that's all you have to look at. You just have your Mark 1 eyeball and what you see stuff happening downrange. And that goes, if you're a competitive shooter and you've had wind flags, all that stuff, it's all the same thing. And so I don't want to go too deeply in the weeds on like exactly, you know, all these different processes. I'll kind of keep it high level and we can do questions.
Yeah.
But wind direction, I will say, I will talk about one technique for wind direction. So wind direction is extremely important because the wind direction will determine the percentage of the wind that's affecting your bullet. And there's a percentage based on the angle between you and your target and the wind to you. The best way to understand that mechanism of wind deflection is to read Bryan's book. Okay, but essentially, if you look at cosines, if I'm shooting this way and the wind is coming from a 30-degree angle this way, the cosine of 30 degrees is a percentage of the wind, which is about 50%. So you could take your calculator and measure an angle and then type in that angle that the wind is coming to you and hit the sine button, or the cosine button, and it's going to give you the percentage of wind. So when we've coached some of the applied ballistics guys in ELR matches, I've done stuff like I've taken a compass and shot an azimuth to the target, and then I'll shoot an azimuth to the wind and might say 49 degrees, and I'll know exactly what the percentage is. Now, how do you find the direction of the wind? So, you know, you've got the old sand and mankind's first wind meter. You wet your finger and stick it up in the air. It works. Whatever side of your finger gets cold works. That's like the evaporative property of cooling, right? Now, it's not a team exercise. You probably want to just use your own finger.
Sometimes.
But I don't know, man. Let your freak flag fly. Whatever, dude. In the air. Only in the air. Thank you. Yes. I know it gets cold up in Canada. All right. So.
Buddy system.
Exactly, the buddy system. So, but by far the most accurate way of doing it is with binoculars or spotting scope. So we know we see mirage out there, which is caused by a refraction of light through air that's kind of heated at different temperatures. So we use mirage, we can use mirage in a basic, very general way of determining which way the wind is blowing, right? So you look downrange, you see those sort of heat waves or whatever, and if they're kind of moving this way, I know in general the wind is out of the right somewhere. If they're kind of moving this way, the wind in general is out of the direction here somewhere. So when you're looking downrange and these mirage waves or heat waves are going straight up, that means that there's no wind direction. It could be coming directly at you or directly from your rear, which means that for our purposes in shooting, there's no effect on left or right of our bullet, really, enough for it to matter. So what you do is just take your spotting scope, your binos, and angle into the direction of the wind until you see the boil or going straight up and down. So for example, if I'm shooting this way and I have a spotting scope, I see general mirage coming in this direction, I'm just gonna rotate my spotting scope or binos and I find it, boom, right there. So even though I have one of these, you know, Garmin ballistic, whatever, everything watch on, I still keep like an old school analog watch face on it. Because what I'll do is I'll point towards 12 o'clock and I'll look down on my watch what direction like my spotting scope is pointed. So I know exactly that the scope is pointed at 130 relative to my line of fire, and I know that a 45-degree wind, it's about 71%, but what I do is I will round that up to 75%, and then that gives me a percentage of whatever wind speed I measure. So being accurate in reading wind is a matter of how much detail you want to do and how much time you have to do it and what your application is. So if you're shooting at a, say, a full-size IPSC target at 300 yards with a 308, it takes, if I'm holding at the right edge up into the wind, it takes about 20 miles per hour of wind to blow me off that target. So if my whole objective is to hit that target, only hit the target, do I need to like pull out the abacus and shoot azimuths at wind and stuff like that? No, I don't. right? I'm trying really hard not to swear. I've already been like 8 deep in the F-bombs already by now. You guys, you can see my eyes kind of glaze over once in a while. That's me pulling it back. So you're welcome, Canada. All right, so anyway. So in any case, so know what that is. So you can actually war game that out. That's why a solver like a Kestrel is really great. Like figure out like how big the target is. Like if you're a hunter, how big is that area you want to shoot in? Or a PRS shooter, how big is that target I want to shoot in? And then just start war gaming. Like, man, that target is 7 miles per hour wide, which means that 7 miles per hour of drift is actually the amount of drift it would take to actually blow me from one edge all the way to the other. So you can really, again, it's about increasing your hit percentage. It's not always about hitting the exact center of the target. You'll find very few elite shooters who ever break a shot dead center on the target. Always shooting either on the right side of the target or on the left side of the target to try to give yourself the full amount of that target to hit going all the way across. I'm always cheating. I'm cheating on a high side of a wind condition, or I'm cheating on the low side of a wind condition. Think about engaging targets as hit percentage, always. And you have lots of tools to war game that stuff out. Both in also in dispersion. You know, you don't have to go too far. You don't have to anneal primers, you know, whatever people are doing now. I don't know. Right? So, because sometimes it doesn't matter. You may think it matters, but it doesn't matter. Right? So there's lots of tools. There's a analytics program that Applied Ballistics have, not to pitch them too hard, but it's a great program, and it lets you do a shot analysis based on all your inputs give you a percentage of a hit of 1,000 rounds. It's really good. So I'll kick it back over to Bryan, but that's sort of the big, if I could leave you guys with anything, it is A, marksmanship matters. Think about your mindset when you're engaging targets in the wind. Be aggressive. Don't let it happen to you. You're happening to the target, dude. Okay? All right? And then also, think about picking up physical skill sets of measuring the wind. Okay, I used to do a little party trick. We shoot Camp Perry a lot, Ohio. When I was in the Army, there's like 1,000 civilian shooters up there shooting 1,000 yards. And I would walk by, I'd see a whole bunch of like 20 civilians gathered around one Kestrel up in the air like it was Moses with the tablets. And I'd walk by 11.7 and just keep walking. And I was usually within about a half mile an hour, right? Because I had been watching flags and trees and everything else all day. Right? So if you can, walk down range to your target and walk back. If you can get on a range you're having a match at, walk all the way down there and then look at the range back uphill. Look at the perspective that you never see. And you'll learn a lot about what the terrain can do to the wind. Okay? So improve those physical skills and only do as much as you have to do to hit a target. Okay, don't overcook it, because wind is a non-deterministic variable. It's changing always, right? So the minute you've got all these inputs that you've seen and you come up with a solution, it's already changing. So if you shoot a shot and you miss, it's the most frustrating thing to see from somebody that you like is them stop, pull out the Kestrel, whatever. Like, you need to believe the bullet and keep that feedback loop close and short and re-engage in very general terms. I'm easy to find. I'm the only guy with my name, like on Planet Earth, on Facebook, whatever. So if anybody has any questions about this stuff, get more in detail, I'm happy to help. I'm an open book.
All right, I'll bring it back around to deterministic variables, and then we'll open up to questions. So Emil touched on it, the value of working at 100 yards. 100 yards is where you learn if your scope is zeroed, if your scope is giving you the correction that you're dialing on it, and if your scope is level, right? All of these things are required to even have a basic understanding of where you're adjusting your aim to at long range, okay? Speaking of wind in particular, it's the level. All right, without a level, if you've got nothing in your field of view to reference horizontal or vertical, the human eye can only do about plus or minus 3 degrees, okay? That's how well the average eyeball can estimate level without an instrument. And at 1,000 yards, for every 1 degree of cant, you're introducing about 10 inches of horizontal offset. right? Because your bullets are going up and then falling to the side because the rifle's canted. And even at 1 degree, that shows up as 10 inches of displacement at 1,000 yards. So plus or minus 3 degrees, that's plus or minus 30 inches. That's a 60-inch windage error that you're going to struggle with before the wind even blows, right? Out of something that can be solved with, they used to be $30, or probably more than $30 now, but probably the cheapest thing attached to your rifle is a bubble level that can eliminate that 60 inches of uncertainty window that you would have at 1,000 yards. So, and you would install the level and verify it on a plumb line at 100 yards. So a lot of the stuff that is deterministic gets determined at 100 yards, and then you bring in the non-deterministic variables later, and now they're isolated. You're not mixing 6 different variables of uncertainty because you've buttoned down everything that can be buttoned down at 100, and so now maybe you've only got 1 or 2 things to worry about shooting long range. So that's how you hit targets, guys, is you move as many things into the deterministic side as you can, and then you get as good as you can judging the non-deterministic things and applying solutions. So that's it for the presentation, but we're here for Q&A too. So any questions on anything we touched on or anything at all?
So when you're relying on pretty much solely on mirage for downrange velocity, determining where that mirage is in relation to where the target is, what's best practice there?
Okay, so the question was, when you're using mirage as a wind speed tool, especially looking downrange, like how do you figure out where that mirage is relative to your target and how and all that stuff?
Because you see several different planes.
Sure. So it is. It really does depend on the optic, right? So we used to use, when I was in the Army, we used to use on the range these big giant binoculars that are made by Kawa. They're about as much as like a Kia Soul with a navigation package, right? And they're giant, right? And with those binoculars, they're true binoculars, right? 2 lenses, which are much better, I think, than like if you just put 2 lenses on 1 optic. Like a true binocular, like those big old World War II ones or these Kawas, that is the best thing you're ever going to look through in terms of like depth of field.
Right.
And so what you see is with focus, you can see all this stuff in depth of field. I mean, so actually that kind of goes to like, where does the wind matter, right?
In addition to that, yeah.
So I'm actually probably going to flip that question over to Bryan because he can explain it better than I can. But I try to find a landmark. So honest, with most spotting scopes and optics, the best you're going to do is about halfway to the target. No matter how down in the, whatever fine you want to do it. I've got some great spotting scopes. I've got spotting scopes from everybody, the best scopes that everybody makes. And I really cannot get a mirage defined at a range much past halfway to the target, especially gone beyond 600-700 meters. What you really see usually is about 1/3 of the way to the target. That's probably what you're looking at. But Bryan, you want to talk about like maybe where the wind matters a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to think about that. I'll start with the textbook way of thinking of it because it's easier. So the textbook way to think about where the wind matters is to look at where it has the most influence on your trajectory, okay? And if you think about it, the wind that's blowing near the shooter at the beginning of the trajectory, that wind is going to influence the trajectory earlier in its flight. It's like if you're trying to get across state and you come out of your driveway and turn the wrong direction. That's different. That's a different way of being lost than making your wrong turn when you're almost at the place, right? So that's kind of the why wind matters closer to the shooter in the textbook answer. Now, chapter 2 of the textbook answer is that if you are shooting into transonic range, the ballistics of the trajectory at that speed can result in a sensitivity that's even greater than the trajectory near you. All right, but that's only if you're shooting out through those ranges where you have the high drag spike at transonic. It concentrates a lot of the lag time in that part of the flight, and these are all things that are, academic ideas like the math of wind deflection. But in the real world, right, the wind doesn't blow like it says in the textbook, constant 10-mile-an-hour crosswind. like Emil said, it's different everywhere between you and the target, and it's ever changing. It's, look at the eddies and currents, of a stream, and that's what the fluid is doing. And so, and because of that, sometimes the wind near the shooter, a lot of times the shooter is shaded or protected from the wind. If you're back in a tree line, or if the topography is such that your bullet is just really close to the ground until maybe you get 800 yards downrange, and then your trajectory is out over a canyon. All right, in certain types of topographies and certain range features, sometimes the most decisive wind is further downrange. Even though your bullet's already half or 3/4 of the way to the target, if it doesn't see any wind until that point, and then it's opened up to a huge crosswind, then that's sometimes it's the wind downrange that matters more. So the policy that I advise about wind deflection is, because it's an indeterministic variable, don't think of it like a deterministic variable. Don't try to apply the same static rule of thumb everywhere to say, oh, well, the wind near me matters the most, so I'm going to ignore that down there. Every range is different, and what I encourage when thinking about this question is to keep an open mind about it. Be aware of your surroundings. All the stuff Emil says about putting a number on the wind, look around you for the causal effects of those. Like, why does it feel like 3 miles an hour here, but 10 steps over there, it's 13 miles an hour? Those are the kind of things that are going to develop an awareness of your wind and how it moves through an environment, so that you can start to piece together how you think your trajectory is going to be affected by the wind, and if it's more heavily weighted towards you or the target side. So there's an entirely different mentality when thinking about wind and non-deterministic variables as there is the other way around. The other way around, you're trying to minimize the uncertainty through measurement and application, but the other side is, it's wizardry. Like, you just have to get good at these things that he describes, and sometimes it does take time. There's ways to accelerate it, but if you're on the right track, it might not take you 5 years, but it's still going to take time, because you just have to be in those environments. You have to be exposed to those cause-effect relationships, and don't skip over the 100-yard work where you can at least get a baseline and know that you'll have a long-range wind zero. That stuff's all done at 100 yards.
One way to kind of improve your ability to analyze like how a particular range, the terrain might influence the wind, is to like do a detailed, like break it down after you shoot. Do like a hot wash after you shoot. I mean, I've shot at some ranges where I have a berm with tree line all the way down for, say, the first 300, 400 yards. And then there's a big break, and then there's another tree line. So I might, just to try to learn more about it, I might go, okay, you can't do this in the moment of the shot, but it might help you learn a little bit about the mechanism and that area. I might say, okay, if I have zero wind, say, for the first 300 yards, and I'll look at my Kestrel and I'll say, what is my remaining velocity so if I was shooting and the bullet started at 300 yards and my target was, say, at 900 yards, right? And then I would go and I'd change my Kestrel to where my velocity, my muzzle velocity, is that velocity at 300. So instead of launching the bullet at, say, 2,800 feet per second, I'm launching the bullet at, say, like 1,900 feet per second. And then I'll see how much wind drift is there from where that part is to the end of the target. And that might be my wind call, right? So be tricky, but that'll help you learn about how terrain and everything else can affect the flight. And also, especially, you know, as we're shooting farther and farther out, like when we're like shooting extreme long range matches, and if you're shooting at, say, 2,400 yards and you're using a 375 caliber bullet, you know that your bullet is about over 100 feet in the air going to the target. So wind will increase in speed as you go up in the air. So that rate of speed is kind of governed by what's happening on the ground, but that's an effect. So sometimes you have to, like, okay, everything lined up. I've got a Kestrel, there's even a weather vane halfway to the target. Why is my solution off? Like, figure out why you're wrong. Also on ballistic solutions for your elevations, if that's wrong, find out why. It's one of your inputs is wrong. The math is just doing the math. Something is happening that you're not aware of, or there's some variable that you're not accounting for. It's the same thing with reading wind. And one last thing on mirage. I try to stay away from using mirage as a speed tool unless it's a completely open area.
If you have nothing else.
If you have nothing else, because mirage You're seeing the mirage at sort of your worm's eye view. Like that's a laser beam from you to the target. Okay, and since it's around here usually that we're looking at it, it can be spoofed by terrain. I've shot on lots of ranges all around the world where you may be up against a berm or tree line on the right-hand side, and the wind is clearly coming from the left. Flags, everything, take grass around the air, and you go down to look through your scope 3 feet off the ground, and the mirage is going the opposite direction. I promise you the wind is not blowing the opposite direction than the birds and the insects and the dandelion, everything. So be careful about using mirage because it can be spoofed and maneuvered by terrain at eye level. Did that answer it? Okay.
Any other questions, guys? There's got to be, I guarantee as soon as we're done, they're going to come with the questions.
Yeah.
All right, guys, well, we'll be here again tomorrow at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.